Before I lose the moment of it, I want to share with you feedback on what I talked about today. And it was my first chapter of a personal story. And I confess to you, as some of you may have noted in my first comments, that I had no idea whether 3 people would watch it, 13 people, or 3,000. I had no idea. And I also knew that many of the subscribers that have joined me at one point or another have either looked for some insight on history or some books or some ancient readings, or obviously the Q business and the rest of that, and some of our current events, the Trump matter. So I must tell you how overwhelmed I was to all of the comments and thoughts and sharings. And what I would like to say about it, what came to mind as I read 100 of your, or more of 200 of your reports, your responses, your comments, nearly 200 of them already, of all of the pain and the sadness and the challenges that many of you have had in life. Many of you are my age or so, and many of you that are younger are also deeply thoughtful, reflective people, and it is manifestly evident in the comments that you have made across the spectrum. Children that passed away, siblings that passed away, parents that had great trauma in their lives and challenges. And for a time when I was piecing together an undergraduate record, I was a philosophy major and took a bunch of Oriental philosophy. And the anecdote that came to me, and I think it was most poignant, was one of an ashram, I think it is, a Buddhist temple study area, and the young upstart, the trainee, I'm not going to get that word right either, was sent out one morning with a bowl to obtain a small portion of rice or a few grains of rice from each family that he visited which had not suffered pain or suffering or loss in their family. And being the 12-year-old that he was, he couldn't imagine how it could be difficult to obtain his breakfast that way. And as he dragged himself in late in the evening, he shared with his senior that there was not a single kernel, not a single item of rice in his bowl, and that he had spent the entire day knocking on doors and listening to stories, people sharing with him the losses they had suffered. And he came to understand what a wonderful story it is, what a wonderful lesson it is. He came to understand that every single person who lived in his neighborhood had suffered great losses to themselves, and they, at some level, when asked, were capable of sharing them. And I have seen much of the same in the responses from you folks today. I'm going to share with you something else that may come up later on, and I most certainly will write about it, and you may hear about it again, but it is wonderfully fitting for how we have shared and how it worked that I was able to be engaged and supported as a young man when the trauma occurred with Chad. And over the next several months, both of my grandparents, both of my grandmothers were living. And I had close and very good relationships with them both. They were very different women. One was the daughter of a minister. She was somewhat proper. She was incredibly well educated. This library behind me came from her, and it was her father's library and her father-in-law's library and her library. And the French and Latin books that are here were hers. And she was able to share with me that she had lost 2 boys, and that she had had great trauma, and that one of the things that helped her survive was that at the time that her son Dick was dying and had this rare disease, and they were going all over the country trying to save him, during that same year she became pregnant with my mother. And it was really only my mother's birth that fall that helped her in some fashion recover and engage the 3 daughters she then had, and then go on to have another daughter. And what I learned from her was the great strength and resilience that a person in her middle and late 80s displays where they have had that kind of suffering in the past. In a very different way, my other grandmother, who was an equally bright woman but much more down-to-earth, grounded, had been a tailor, had been married twice, grew up in Norway, came to America on her own, on a whim, and did not return for 60 odd years, was also in her 80s or early 90s, and she too had lost 2 sons. And they had died within 6 months of each other. They were both, I think, between 18 and 20 years of age, one in a car accident and one with another severe trauma. And she too was able to show and demonstrate to me the elegance and resilience and reserve, and what both of them showed me was that they weren't victims. They were not victims. They did not lose who they were, the journey they had, or their connections to the rest of the family as a result of the great trauma they had faced. So I didn't get all that at that time, but I got the messages then, and I carried them with me for the rest of my life, and I learned piece by piece to emulate my grandmothers, who had like many of you, suffered great losses and stepped back into life and continued to learn and grow from it and to share. And of course, as I shared earlier about serendipity, there are no accidents. Both of my grandmothers lost 2 children. My mother lost 2 children. And as you will discover later on in the story, so did I. So what I say to each of you, first of all, thank you. Thank you for the marvelous support, engagement, endearment, prayers, thoughts, reflections, and for your sharing as well the pieces of you that you have, the scars, the nasty cuts that you've had philosophically, metaphysically, and that you have recovered from. Thank you for sharing. And my interest in sharing this story is multifold. First of all, it is to come to a place of presence with other people who have had losses, and to say the same things to you that my grandmothers and my mother said to me, my parents said to me, which is, step back into life, live life fully, appreciate what it is that you have, know that this was meant to be in some fashion, and to understand that. That's the first part of it. The second part of it for me was, and you will hear more of this as we get farther into the story, was for me to see the world in a totally different way. And I will share with you the evolution of my metamorphosis, which I'd like to tell you took a few weeks, but it took more than 20 years, and I am now 20 years out from Chad's passing. So, and I'm still learning. And the third part about it is the spiritual journey that came to me through this entire process. And some of you I know will find my spiritual journey odd and uncommon and maybe not like yours. But what I ask you to do is to give it space, both for your own journey and for mine. And at some point we'll get to a place where we will have to keep open minds about how we all get where we are. But I see every one of us as on a growth path that is set for us, and where we are given an opportunity to either choose the path of growth or decline the path of growth, and to grow through it and to gain the only thing that we ultimately end up with, the only thing we take with us when we get all done, which is how it is that we as spirits have bettered ourselves and improved upon the lives of everybody else that's here. That's what I believe. So, I came to this thought late this afternoon that the least I could do was to share some of the thoughts and reflections I have about the interaction that we have had today with the story I've begun to share, to thank you for it. And the other thing I would like to do, and if some of you have not done so, please take a look at the comments below that story. They are amazing, heart-rending, tear-jerking, often, and hopeful, uplifting, and spiritually engaging. I just cannot tell you how much I appreciate it. So thank you all for everything that you have shared with me and for your support in the process of doing this. It is greatly appreciated. So with that, I will pass on this one, and sometime this next week I'll share a next chapter. And I will assure you that it is probably not as tear-rending as the one that we had today. Thanks.